Do you find that there's particular key ingredients in those systems that you create that are just really important?
I think the key ingredient is collaboration. When creating a design system, interaction design, visual design, and content design are intertwined. I think that same collaboration is critical to a successful design system. And I would say the other ingredient would be
Today on the podcast, we'll be talking to Maria Alexander. Maria is UX Content Design Principal at Blue Shield of California. We'll be talking to her about the importance of copy and language in truly driving delight across the user experience. We'll also be talking about how, really, UX experts are detectives. They're digging deep into analytics and research to find those nuggets of interest. And we'll also be mentioning how important it is that you develop design systems and how collaboration is the key to an effective design system. We're really excited to have Maria on the podcast today. Let's get started. Maria, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Shamir. It's really a pleasure.
Well, it's always exciting to talk about the post-click experience from so many different angles. And one of the ones I love the most is talking about it from the angle of the UX. Talking about UX design, talking about writing and content and all those elements that play into the user experience. Because some people kind of dismiss that, right, as just being kind of the creative element of it, as if it doesn't matter. And people don't recognize how much weight that holds, right, in the experience, right? Even you think about a physical store, companies invest a lot of money, do a lot of research for the exact layout of the store, where things are positioned, right? The colors that are being used, the lighting, right? It's all the user experience, right? It really just adds to people's ability to feel comfortable in the environment they're in when they're shopping. And the same thing happens online. So it's great to talk to you about that. So when we talk about the online user experience or the online user journey, as it were, one of the things we talk about a lot is friction, right? The fact that we want people to not have any friction as they move through their user journey. When people talk about friction, they tend to talk about it a lot, very much from a design, kind of information architecture standpoint, which is important. But from your perspective, especially with your background in writing, how does language play a role in delivering that kind of frictionless experience?
First of all, to me, a frictionless user experience means that the user easily and quickly accomplishes the task they set out to do. The language used in that experience is inextricable from the interaction design and the visual design. So, they all work together harmoniously. You just can't pull it apart and say, well, the words worked or this worked. That's why UX writers, they have to be brought in at the very beginning of any project for that to work. It's not after the product designer has mocked up a bunch of wireframes. That's way too late. Way too late. UX writers are there to help avoid plot holes, and that's something I think we're going to get into later. Plot holes in the design and in the flow, and it's going to make the flow as straightforward as possible so that they get the right information at the right time. So I guess for me, that's really, in terms of language, that's the frictionless part of it. Because when they get the right information at the right time, and also in the right affordances, right, then that's what makes it frictionless. And also another part of language we don't talk about a lot necessarily is accessibility standards. Because the accessibility standards and how they are mirrored with the UI, how they work with UI. If the accessibility standards are not met within the user interface, it doesn't matter what you say. People won't be able to see it because the contrast isn't high enough. There's all kinds of issues that can happen. And then if the ARIA language isn't set up correctly, we have people who are not going to be able to access your language. So it doesn't matter what you're saying. It matters, but it's not what, it doesn't matter. So it's really about, and also setting up that language in patterns that people recognize. We talk a lot about Jacob's law. What do people expect? And It's not to say that the microcopy isn't important, because it can be critical if it's wrong. But the same way that content can't fix interaction and data problems, interaction design can't fix bad content. It's just all something that all works together. That's the part that has to be seamless as well. It all has to come together in the right way to make it a truly frictionless experience.
I think when user experience really clicked for me was that realization, and you very much touched on it, that essentially the copy comes first, right? The copy and the language are really the driving mechanism, because that's what people have come for, right? They've come to get the information they need in order to make the decision that the organization wants them to make to continue the experience. Whether that's to look something up, to pay a bill, to make a purchase, to fill out a form, right? Complete an application, whatever that is, people are looking for information in order to make that decision to say, I want to move forward. And then information comes in the form of words. I mean, that's how it comes. I mean, sometimes obviously also things like video, right? But more times than not, it comes in the form of words. So the words are really the driving mechanism. And it's, well, how do we organize those words in a logical way that people can very quickly absorb that, right? That they can comprehend it, right? That they're not overwhelmed by it, that they can find what they're looking for. And that's the other aspects of it, right? That's the architecture and the layout, right? The content strategy in terms of the story you're trying to tell, right? So it, it it's interesting how you really focused and honed in on the fact that you've got to bring in the copywriters, the people responsible for language at the very beginning, because really they're driving it. And then you're kind of saying, okay, great. Now that we have all this wonderful content, how do we structure it and lay it out in a way that people can find it, right? That's kind of your challenge in your world, right?
Right, exactly. And we sometimes use something called a priority guide.
Mm,
If a let's say an interaction designer is not available or something going on, like the content strategist will create this priority guide, which is like a wireframe but made out of words,
mm,
and about, what's happening where and when. And so it just sort of lays out everything, that information architecture and those that expected interaction, in a way so that the content strategist understands it.
mhm,
We don't use it a lot where I'm at right now, but we do. We're looking at it. We're doing it more and more
mhm.
because of how important it is that language and story drive what we're doing on each screen, and and how those screens, the flow of those screens, if there's more than one.
I love that, and I love that the fact that it's driving the story you're trying to tell, right? That was a critical component. I wonder to ask you what your thought is when you think about language, especially when you're thinking about language online. People tend to think about it very mechanically. Maybe might be the word to use, right? And let me kind of rephrase that. It's funny. People kind of think about it one of two ways, right? It's either becomes very almost kind of like romance copy, right? That doesn't tell you anything, right? Very to the extreme from a marketing standpoint, or it can become very mechanical, right? Kind of very technical, very quickly, right? But there's kind of that sweet spot, it seems, in the middle where you're getting the information across in a clear way, but the connotation of that information and how it's presented matters a great deal, or at least it seems that way to me. Is that what you found to be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want that UX writing to reflect the brand. And that brand voice, like you said, I mean, it could be, keeping in mind, we're not trying to sell anything at this point. The copywriters are selling, the marketing team and the brand team are selling. But what we're doing is we're helping. And we want to have that continuous feeling in the experience, that the user, once they have logged in, or whatever, once they've signed into the digital experience, that they're having, it's the same company, that it's the same experience. They have that same personality. And some companies do that just better than others. They're really, and they have little moments of delight in it. I mean, and in other companies, it's like, well, it would be delightful if it just worked. You know, we just want it to, we just want it to work. And so I'm not sure it's always as important as just making sure that the user can get done what they need to get done. It's like at Blue Shield, I've sort of removed or tried to remove the exclamation point. This is not the lottery, this is health insurance. And it's a very, once we're on the other side, we're trying to help people. We need to be compassionate. We need to be human. We need to be, and all these things. But we're not excited because, people they're trying to do something very serious, which is to access their health insurance. And it's probably because somebody's sick.
And I like the fact that that is such an important aspect of it, right? Of maintaining that empathy, that human aspect of it, because of, to your point, the brand and the reason why that person is there and what's driving them and what's really their focal point in engaging with the experience. So that kind of makes me think, how big of a role does the feedback that you're getting from the people who are interacting with the experience, how big a role is that feedback or that research that you're doing play into the language and the content and the overall UX you're trying to deliver back to them?
I mean, it plays a pretty big role. I mean, there are various tools that companies use and that we've used as of late. We've had to rethink some of our approaches, but um, like Google Analytics and Glassbox, those are really great tools because you can drill down into the individual user journeys. You can see where people are getting bogged down, where they're dropping off, where they're rage clicking. You can see what's happening. What we rely on a lot right now, because we can't use Google Analytics and Glassbox for various reasons at the moment, we are leveraging our UX research testing. And so, marketing is doing their research, which is extremely valuable. And then we're doing, as far as product research on we have, the products that are the things that we are selling. Then we're doing our research on the digital products, like what is happening on the website and then post sign in. So we do a lot of testing to get a sense of what the users want and how they think. And I mean, I really love working with our researchers. That's just something that just thrills me to be able to, have input on a test or, just let them run, like just kind of find out what do people think, and give them some screens and some words. And I mean, they're the professionals, right? So it's really been very helpful. And we do have other tools. I mean, I know companies use surveys, but oftentimes they only answer those surveys when they're really mad. So you really have to look at it as a data point and not the data. It's not the only thing. It's like it's not the driver. A handful of complaints might indicate something is wrong. If they say I can't find, something, then you could say, okay, there's something going on here, but what is it exactly? We don't really know. So you have to dig deeper with analytics and research.
One of the things that we've really found that echoes exactly what you're saying is the importance of like a thematic analysis, right? So let's look at these different data points. What are people saying in user tests? What are people saying in surveys? What is the experience analytics showing us? What is the web analytics, the Google analytics showing us? And then kind of what story, right, for lack of a better term, is that telling us when we look across those various data points? Because it's usually when we're getting inputs from different places that we're getting a more complete picture of exactly what the struggles are for the customer or the person that's on the experience and how we can kind of help move them forward. So kind of what's the thread or the theme that kind of runs through everything we're seeing, what they're telling us in the surveys, what we're hearing or seeing in the user testing, what we're seeing on the session replays and the heat maps. And it's like, okay, if we can find those threads, those are probably the main things that we really need to address, right? Those are the things that are showing up in different ways. And we're just able to look at it from different angles, right? And get a good complete picture of what those challenges are. Have you kind of found that to be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes as a content strategist, I've been able to pin exactly what was going on because of language. Where if there's a flow where we're using the same word in two different ways. So a very important word. And so people are dropping because they're confused. Or we see, I mean, we don't know for sure if it's correlation or causation. But when we're looking at it and people are dropping, when I say, oh, and I realize, okay, and I'm looking and I say, oh, this is where we use that same word, but in an entirely different way. Is it causing, and I'm just like, I think it's causing confusion. And that sometimes happens too, or we have to be detectives. We have to go in. I mean, we know, as designers, we have to be detectives sometimes to figure out what's happening, because people are not telling us that they're confused. They're just dropping. And, that can be really bad.
It's interesting. I think people underestimate how easy it is for a person to run into a bump in the road and bail on the entire process. I think about and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but Kahneman's work with system one and system two thinking, kind of the quick part of the brain, that system one thinking that's just very reactive, right? And then the more logical, thoughtful process in the brain in system two, right? So things you have to think of, two plus two is four. Like, great. Like I can chew bubble gum, walk down the road and tell you two plus two is four, right? But the minute you ask me to say, well, what's, 75 divided by, 18, it's like, okay, I need to stop chewing. I need to stop walking. And I need to think, right? So now I've gone from system one to system two, right, in my thinking. And people don't like going to system two because it's a heavier load, right? It's just that it's a cognitive load. They like to stay in system one as long as possible. So the minute they get a bump of the road and it pushes them into system two or deeper into system two, right? It's just like, this is a lot of work and people like easy. Like,
No, and it's okay. They should. They should. We should make their lives easy. I 100% believe that. So,
exactly. So I can see why, even, parsing the language to that level is so incredibly important, because you're trying to keep it as easy as possible for as long as possible in that process so that they can accomplish their goal. And there's real business reasons for that too, right? Because you're trying to keep people in that digital experience, keep those costs down, and allow them to kind of do it in their own time, in their own way to do that. And I think ultimately, the more that you're taking in that feedback and using that in optimizing that UX, you're building trust, right? Like you're building trust with that person because they kind of see, their needs are being echoed in the experience that they're reacting with. How important have you found trust to be as you're interacting with your different customers in that user experience?
well, I mean, especially in healthcare, it's extremely important because the industry as a whole is really under a lot of stress. And I think when people are designing, I mean, trust is not as tangible as clicks and conversions. So the designers don't necessarily connect the loss of trust to poor user experiences. They don't see, like, unless they're doing a lot of user research and they don't know, like, what their poor UX choices are doing, and they're not getting those messages. It's easy to misattribute, like, a fall in sales or lack of traffic, to brand or something else, when it's really the digital platform isn't usable. And when I wouldn't feel safe giving my money to a, sort of janky e-commerce system, right? I mean, that's a really obvious one. Anything with a shoddy e-commerce experience makes me, uneasy. But a company that hides important information with poor information architecture, sometimes sorry, sometimes organizations forget that transparency is as important in business as it is, in personal relationships. So their user relationships are damaged when they hide things. And then sometimes they don't even realize they've hidden it. Maybe they're using poor navigation terms. They're trying to be fancy, and they don't realize that, oh, this is hiding information. Why would nobody's going to trust me if they think I'm hiding things, right? So, I think that it's something that people don't realize is directly tied to that user experience, and trust is so important for retaining customers in general.
It's such a psychology. It's like such a psychological play, right? There's so many things. There's so much. We talk about fear, uncertainty, and doubt a lot, right? FUD. And there's so much of that that comes into play, whether you're purchasing, whether you're trying to find, questions about your insurance or find the proper provider, or, trying to figure out a bill and what's covered and what's not covered. Whatever that is, you've got all these psychological components constantly kind of working against you. And as a UX, expert, you're trying to alleviate those psychological pressures and weights, right? You're trying to lift them off and say, nope, you're safe. You're safe. You can trust me. Just keep going down the process. You're going the right way. You're doing the right thing, right? You're trying to give those different factors as they move down that path and kind of continue down that story that you're trying to tell them that leads them ultimately to the final chapter, which is where they want to get to, right? To find that the answer to that question, to find that provider, whatever that may be, given their goal on that particular day. Um, so that makes me think then, you're someone who knows a lot about story, right? In your other life, right? Right? You're a writer, you write fiction, right? You're a narrative designer. Do you find that kind of thinking and those kinds of skills come into play in your kind of, in this more corporate professional life, as a UX strategist?
Oh, very much so. In fact, I was just looking the other night. I noticed that back in 2019, almost exactly just over 6 years ago, I published an article on LinkedIn about that very same thing. And it was about, from creativity to commerce and and I think it's a little dated. Like, I've learned a lot in the last 6 years. I think we can change quite a bit, in terms of our professionalism and our, and our skill set in 6 years. Um, and but some of the same principles still apply. So, like, you know, we've all had that experience where we were watching a movie, and at some point we said, "Wait a second, that doesn't make sense." Why did that character do that? Would that character do that? So, we're all consumers of narratives of all kinds. So we know instinctively when a story is taken an illogical turn, either because the character motivation is off or the logical flow is, faulty. Um, so when that happens, now this was getting to the plot holes I mentioned earlier, that those plot holes, they take you out of the story. And when we look at digital experiences, good UX content strategy keeps you in the story, and it makes things so smooth you don't even realize that you've been able to, just go right through and complete the task and to do what you need to do. It's You don't necessarily notice the same way, like with a good book or a movie, you don't necessarily notice the good writing. You just sort of sink into it and it carries you along.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I think about like a really good, a well-written TV show or a well-written movie, and how flawlessly it kind of moves you through, how smooth it is, to the point where you don't even realize how much time has passed. Maybe it's a 45-minute show and it felt like it was 10 minutes because it just went by so quickly. And conversely, when it's poorly written, it's just like, when is this thing going to be over? Like, you know.
Right. Or you just stop it. You drop. You drop like the user would.
And it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing with a UX, right? When it's smooth, it's just going fast, and you don't even realize it before you know what you've done. It's like, I think about something as smooth and something that we're used to, like an Amazon purchase. How quickly it is for me to purchase something from Amazon. It's like I tripped and fell, and I hit the purchase button, and it's just like, oh, okay, I guess
Right.
that's on the way now, right? It's just right, and that's their job, right? It's to make that so smooth and so easy, and to make it so familiar to me that it just happens, and it's just before I know it, it's just like, yeah, I bought that, like that was it, right? And then I don't want to look at how much I bought, but yeah.
Right, right, there's that too. I mean, but like on Netflix, they've removed a lot of abrasion in their experience by just auto playing the next episode, and they give you some space. They give you a few seconds so you could say, "Oh no, wait, I want to wait. I want to watch the next episode over, tomorrow night's dinner, or whatever." It's it's that kind of thing, and there was another point I wanted to make, if that's okay. So yeah, I was going to talk about like, so the way I feel like I have a very my eye is honed for abrasion in stories in general because I don't want my readers to suffer abrasion. I don't want the users to suffer abrasion. So it could be, and it could be for a number of things: structural issues, logical flow, motivation, right? So like, and this was something that came up in that LinkedIn article I wrote. The motivation, when an author is crafting a character, they're looking at motivation. They're looking at who is that character, why are they there, and that's very similar in a way to the when we're UX team, we're looking at our users and we're crafting those user personas, but instead of getting specific, we're getting broad and we're trying to find who are those characters. Like we create that character profile of the person, and so there's a lot of similar thinking that goes into this, and it's been extremely helpful for me as I've been working in UX. Especially it helped when I was working in marketing, but definitely in UX because I could really figure out what is the motivation between from certain people, and what are they doing? Why are they here?
I love that you're sharing these insights about these kind of these tips and tools and things you've done yourself and with your teams, because I know you spent time in your career kind of building design systems, right? So that you're able to provide the team with structure on how they can kind of go through the process and make sure they're delivering a important and powerful user and effective user experience. Do you find that there's particular key ingredients in those systems that you create that are just really important? You mentioned a few of them, but are there really kind of nuggets of like, this is what makes it really work, or this it can't work without this other component?
I think the key ingredient is collaboration. I think when creating a design system, that collaboration, I think I mentioned it earlier, like how interaction design, visual design, and content design are intertwined. They're just perfectly meshed together. I think that same collaboration is critical to to a successful design system, because if you have, like, for example, just the interaction designers and the user interface folk, just creating components on their own, they don't know, do we need a headline here? Do we need a subtitle here? What do we need in this component? And the content designer can go and say, oh no, this is a banner. I don't need a heading and a banner. I just need the message, and have that kind of interaction, right? So that collaboration is super critical. And I would say the other ingredient would be patience. Creating a design system is hard. It's hard work. And it takes a lot of effort with everyone working together. And like, we just internally launched our design system on Zero Height. And it was a big thing to celebrate because it was years in the making. So these things, they're incremental. It's a living document. It's, even though like it's code, the components are code for our developers, we can revise that. And that's the thing to keep in mind. And we live in an agile environment. So, patience rather than perfection, progress rather than perfection, I think they say in 12 steps, is like, that's really key to a great design system.
You mentioned collaboration. You mentioned the importance of progress, right? Of making it very, very iterative in terms of what you're delivering. I wonder if we could take a second and kind of take that just a little bit even broader. Um, when we talk about the post experience a lot here on the pod, one of the things that we talk about is oftentimes it's an avoided space because it gets a lot more complicated, right? Especially for marketers. Advertising, relatively speaking, is kind of easy. It's not easy, but relative, it's easier, right? But once you kind of get past the ad and you get to the actual post experience, you've got marketing and what they want to do, you've got product and what they need to do, you've got IT and what they need to do, and of course, each of those paths goes in very different directions in terms of those teams and what's important for them. But as you mentioned, collaboration is key. Like you've got to have all those teams in perfect alignment to make sure that ultimately you're able to deliver the kind of experience that people ultimately want, right? So, how have you found, has you worked both with your own teams, right, on the UX side, but obviously has you've had to work with product teams, has you've had to work with IT teams, with marketing teams? How do you build those bridges? How do you maintain that level of collaboration where oftentimes those teams can get very siloed from each other, especially in large organizations?
First of all, I think listening is a highly underrated component of silo busting. Um, I mean, because once we start listening to each other, well, first we need those opportunities, right? So we have to create those opportunities. And for me, like, I will just, I'm obviously not a shrinking violet. Like, I will just message someone and say, "Hey, let's talk about blah," and so I will, so creating those opportunities to talk and also create those opportunities just to listen to what other people are doing and then to acknowledge, their pain points and then to find that alignment, right? It is, and sometimes it's leadership that needs to create those opportunities, especially for bigger processes that can happen. So, when you have a more or less, especially in big organizations where you can create, there can be a lot of bureaucracy. There has to be buy-in from leadership to create those opportunities and those meetings where we meet. Like in this environment, we are almost fully remote. Like some people are hybrid, but for the most part, we're remote. To create those opportunities for us to come together and talk face to face and to solve problems, to really tackle like what is slowing us down. So listening is a key component, understanding, being of service to one another, having that moment, because I think sometimes in silos we I mean, and which is good in a way, we want to feel a sense of purpose and a sense of pride in what we do. And that's very important. Everybody needs to have that, to work well. But at the same time, having that, being in that learning mindset and in that idea, like, oh, maybe there's something we can do a little better or a little differently that would help connect with all these other teams or help us connect with one other team. That's really important. And some companies I've seen it work better than others. It seemed less problematic at Disney for some reason. I don't know why, but I think that it's all about the magic, right? The magic. So so but it can be a real issue.
I wonder, it's funny you say that about Disney. I wonder if the reason it worked there so well is because, you know, Parks and Resorts online, which is what it was when, when you and I were there, Parks and Resorts
Back in the
digital,
day,
right?
yeah.
It was kind of it was kind of like its own little world within, the rest of the team that we kind of sat with at World, right? And I wonder if that sense of community and that sense of unity that we had, because things were a little bit different. We operated based on a little bit different standards than everyone else who kind of worked on the corporate side at World. I wonder if that
Yes,
sense of like
true.
unity, right, really kind of bonded us together and allowed us to be a lot more collaborative because of that, right? We kind of saw
I
ourselves as
think
like,
so.
we're this kind of this special team within a team, so to speak. And I wonder if that kind of impacted that.
Oh, I think so. I mean, we were also, yeah, we were sort of I mean, we were the weird team. It was a weird department because we were the internet. It was still considered sort of like an like an internet startup for a long time, and we just did whatever we needed to do, and we didn't really. It's not that we didn't have to answer to anyone. I think things started to change though the year that I think it was 2011 when it was announced that the Parks and Resorts websites had generated over $1 billion in revenue, and suddenly the Eye of Sauron was on us because, so I think things started to change then. I left in 2012, but I think that, I think you're right. Like, it was we had such a strong sense of community there. It was it was this and this sense of purpose, and the ability to and the fact that the product was so fun, we could go and we could bond over the how fun the product was. I think that went a long way. Now, that isn't to say it wasn't the organization didn't have other challenges. It really did, really seriously.
Do you think it's important for you mentioned leadership creating opportunities for collaboration, right? Creating opportunities for communication, which is super important. Um, how important do you think it is for not just that, but for leadership to go one step further and really set the tone and kind of lead by example when it comes to communication and collaboration? How critical do you think that is?
Absolutely, it's completely, because otherwise, I mean, we can do all that we wanna do. We can do all the talking and all the like, but if leadership isn't aligned with us, that top down, it's very important. I'd have to say that, um, having someone that you're reporting to or even your director, really, arguing on your behalf. I don't like the word argue. It's more like advocating for you, to for your teams to collaborate. They can go off and have those conversations with other leadership too. But I've also had the experience, and maybe this is also just Blue Shield of, I mean, some of the managers there, I mean, a lot of the managers there are just really good souls, and they just reach out. Like, I mean, there's a lot, and I think that's also because Blue Shield has this mission. We really have a mission, and we're a nonprofit. So, the people who are there because they share that mission, of providing healthcare, affordable healthcare, and we're trying to get there. It's very hard, but it is our mission. And I think that helps too. Maybe the mission was the magic at Disney as well.
So, Maria, let me leave you on this question. As you think about your years of experience doing this across obviously very, very large organizations, working across all kinds of teams with all kinds of teams, if you're talking to other UX professionals out there and they're really trying to drive a positive, impactful post-click experience, something that's really going to be an easy way for people to move through that journey and be able to accomplish those goals that they want them to accomplish, kind of what's the magic sauce, right? Like what's that one or two things that just is really important for them to really kind of wrap their heads around to be able to help deliver that and move that forward.
I think the big thing is that it's not about us, it's about them. It's all about the user. It does not matter a whit what we think. Ultimately, it's about what the user thinks and what the user wants, and what the user expects. We have our expertise, obviously, but we use our expertise to support them, to help them get what they want and what they need. And second of all, I think another important ingredient is just, um, positive intent, recognizing positive intent in other people. And I feel like that's been a really big lesson for me. And that helps me connect with the other people on my team on a deeper level, and also with other people in the organization, and other people in general. To assume positive intent, um, brings in a wealth of experience and opens doors that you wouldn't think would open.
Maria, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being on the pod. What a great conversation. Really enjoyed having you and hope to have you again in the future.
Thank you, Shamir. Yeah, me too. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.